Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Owen Richardson. I'm the Director here at Trade Compliance Responsible Business Unit in the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. You're all very welcome here on this Valentine's Day. We have a very good rounded discussion here on three different topics under the Responsible Business remit. This is the second in our series of Responsible Business webinars. We'll be hopefully having 4 this year on a varying number of topics contained under the Responsible Business banner, as it were. Just to note that we are recording this webinar, which will have the presentations and the questions and answers at the end, and it will be kept on our website so that if people need to come back and view it, or there's anything additional that they can get out of it, it'll be available for them. There's a slight amendment, as you will see, from our original agenda. We have Paul McMahon, who's going to be speaking on the OECD National Contact Point for Multinationals on the RBC side. We have Ord O'Brien, who's going to be speaking on the CSRD, and you have to forgive the acronyms, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And we have Ashley McCarthy, who's going to be speaking on the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. So quite a mouthful in a number of those already. This is in place of the CSDDD, the Due Diligence Directive, where officials were unfortunately called away as they had to prioritise the ongoing negotiations at EU level. We had expected that these were coming to an end, but there's a need for agreement with 27 other member states. So you can understand that sometimes these things have to go back into negotiations. We hope to have it in one of the further Responsible Business webinars later in the year. So just a quick point for myself. I lead on the Responsible Business coordination side within our department, and so we pull from various different areas within this department. Alongside this, we have a Responsible Business Forum, which is chaired by Minister Cleary, who has asked for regular stakeholder engagement on the topics included under Responsible Business. This is to ensure that we have early engagement, strong engagement with a variety of stakeholders, and that we get our messaging out as strongly as we can. And really, one of the core areas in that is our Responsible Business Communications Plan, part of which is this webinar, and we will be leading in other areas in that, in engagement with the public and with individual stakeholders. And it's really going to focus on what businesses need to know and where to access the information. As there are a number of initiatives are at the start of their negotiations at EU, some are a little bit further along. This is a process that's going to take at least 12 to 14 to 16 months. But we will have at the end, hopefully, something that is accessible for businesses, both large and small, and bringing accessible language where they can see what is relevant to them. So we'll have continued engagement with stakeholders through media channels, at stakeholder forums, and potential impacts on where these will be for specific businesses in their specific fields. Really, our current focus is for businesses to know your supply chain in relation to sustainability. Many of you have already done this in areas such as environmental concerns, and also in, for example, transportation when COVID hit. So a lot of experience there, and it's really been mapping this onto the sustainability area. So I'd now like to introduce a recorded message from Minister Darragh Leary, the Minister for Trade Promotion, Digital and Company Regulation. Unfortunately, he was going to be at this live, but government business has taken him away. He is a really key stakeholder in this. He's driving policymakers to engage with you, and he's very passionate that we should be here talking to you as stakeholders and at face-to-face in the forums. So without further ado, I'd like to present this short recorded message from Minister Leary. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to join us on this webinar regarding Responsible Business initiatives. I'm so sorry I can't join you live owing to Dáil commitments, but I am delighted to see so many have registered and that there's been so much engagement on this important topic on all of your behalves. I know many of you attended the first webinar on this topic last year, and I wanted to bring this webinar together to bring you up to date on the main developments in this space since that. EU legislative files are advancing at different stages, and we're going to focus on two of those in particular today. Since last year, in our department, we have created a Responsible Business Forum, which I chair. This forum has provided the opportunity to share information, but it is also my aim that it will capture the views, the concerns, and the suggestions of relevant stakeholders, including yourselves. Discussions at the forum will help us formulate policies and programs that will assist businesses adapt to the changes, but also grasp the opportunities that will give them a competitive advantage in this space. Two of the initiatives that this particular webinar are going to focus on are the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and the Regulation on Eco-Design for Sustainable Practice. CSRD will standardise sustainability reporting by companies across the EU, allowing investors, consumers, policymakers, and other stakeholders to make choices based on the performance of companies on environmental and social matters. The reporting requirements will strengthen the link between the environment and other important social matters and companies' operations and direction. And it will redefine what we think of as important when we think about company performance in the future. The directive is not simply a compliance requirement. It is more accurately a strategic imperative for Irish businesses to remain relevant and remain competitive. The Regulation on Eco-Design for Sustainable Products, the ESPR, extends the scope of the eco-design framework to cover the broadest range of products and to include additional sustainability criteria that boost the circularity of products that we use. It will introduce a digital product passport and will provide for information collection, and in many cases bans on the destruction of unsold consumer goods. I'm conscious of the broad range of responsible business-related initiatives that are confronting business, particularly at the moment. We will continue our efforts to engage with you in a coherent and a consistent manner to help you navigate the path ahead. Finally, while businesses operate to make a profit, they also provide employment, prosperity, improvements in living standards, and societal well-being. We have prospered as a country thanks to the transformative power that businesses and open trade have had, and I want this to continue. However, now is also the time that we examine and put measures in place to ensure that we continue to prosper sustainably to everyone's benefit, not just here in Ireland, but also where businesses operate around the globe. Expectations of responsible and sustainable business practices are rising and are rising fast. Companies in Ireland must now transform their operations to meet those expectations. Those that act will thrive. Those that are represented on this call here today are acting. We know that businesses are keen to meet this challenge. This department is eager to help. Gurmeen Mahmood.
There are some excellent words from Minister Cleary, who, as I said, is a real champion in this area. So first, I'd like to introduce our first speaker on this. It's my colleague, Paul McMahon, who's going to speak on the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. Share my slides here. Hope everybody can see that. So good morning, everyone. I am going to give you a whistle-stop tour of the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct and the role of the national contact point under these guidelines. So I'm sure some of you are wondering what is meant here by the OECD guidelines for anybody that hasn't heard about these before. We refer to them simply as the guidelines, and they provide a comprehensive framework for responsible business conduct. So they reflect the expectations from government to business on how to act responsibly, covering all major areas of business ethics with an aim to promote positive positive contribution by enterprises to economic, environmental, and social progress. And you're wondering, how did they do this? They do it by providing principles and standards in responsible business conduct, or RBC for short, consistent with applicable laws and internationally recognized standards. So, for example, the Human Rights Chapter, Chapter 4, is aligned with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, while the Chapter on Employment and Industrial Relations is aligned with ILO labour standards. The guidelines themselves they were incepted back in 1976 and have been revised 6 times since then, with the last revision taking place last year, which I'll talk about shortly. It builds on the 2011 revision, which included the concept of risk-based due diligence for RBC. It is important to point out the guidelines are voluntary recommendations and therefore are non-binding on enterprises, but the 51 adhering countries, including Ireland, we are bound to implement them. So the guidelines themselves, they are divided into 2 parts, and the first part relates to the recommendations for responsible business conduct. And you'll see in the box there on the right, there are 9 thematic areas, but there are also 2 chapters at the start on concepts and principles and general policies. The second part of the guidelines is the implementation procedures for the adhering countries. So in a way, I see that as the instruction manuals for the national contact points, including our own. So the chapters most referred to in complaints to date have been the General Policies chapter, the Human Rights chapter, the Employment and Industrial Relations chapter, and the Environment chapter. The General Policies chapter includes important provisions around implementing due diligence with respect to a company's own activities and business relationships, and to engage with relevant stakeholders in a meaningful way. On human rights, enterprises can impact on virtually the entire spectrum on internationally recognized human rights. And this chapter establishes that enterprises should conduct due diligence to avoid causing or contributing to adverse human rights impacts in their own activities, but also those linked to their supply chains and business relationships. The chapter on employment and industrial relations promotes observing international labour standards developed by the ILO, by asking enterprises to respect core labour rights and support the establishment of responsible labour and industrial relations policies. So as I mentioned, the last update to the guidelines before last year was back in 2011. And as you can imagine, a lot has changed in the world since then. So to ensure that the guidelines remain relevant to address global challenges in an ever-changing world, targeted updates took place rather than a complete overhaul. And these targeted updates have taken account of changes such as climate change, the digital world, and the need for resilient and inclusive supply chains. As you might suspect, this means chapters on the environment and science, technology, and innovation have been significantly updated to reflect developments in these spaces. The environment chapter clarifies expectations for responsible business conduct related to climate change and biodiversity, aligning with internationally agreed goals on climate change and biodiversity. There are now due diligence recommendations to harness the digital transformation in risk-based due diligence, as risk-based due diligence has been included on the development, financing, sale, licensing, trade, and use of technology, including gathering and using data. Well, there are now due diligence recommendations to harness this digital transformation. The Human Rights chapter has also been updated to include strengthened provisions regarding human rights defenders and Indigenous peoples, while the chapter on disclosure reflects the growing demand for RBC by both stakeholders and shareholders, and is aligned with the G20 OECD principles on corporate governance. The implementation procedures, as I mentioned, is a guide for the NCPs. It's also been updated to advance achieving functional equivalence amongst the 51 NCPs across the globe, while taking into account the need for flexibility. The essence of the guidelines is to avoid adverse impacts directly by the enterprise or indirectly through a business relationship, for example. So to avoid, prevent, and mitigate adverse impacts, enterprises should carry out what's known as due diligence. And this means that they should introduce a process to identify, prevent, reduce, and account for how they address actual and potential adverse impacts. To assist them with this, in 2018, the OECD published the due diligence guidance. This guidance for RBC provides practical support to enterprises and helps to promote a common understanding amongst governments and stakeholders on due diligence for RBC. It sets out a six-step due diligence process, which is one, to embed responsible business conduct into policies and management systems. Two, to identify and assess adverse impacts in operations, supply chains, and business relationships. Three, to cease, prevent, or mitigate adverse impacts. Four, to track implementation and results. Five, to communicate how the impacts are addressed. And six, to provide for or cooperate in remediation when appropriate. In addition, you'll see there's guidance for 5 specific sectors, which was issued to support enterprises in these areas. They include the extractive, agriculture, minerals, garment and footwear, and financial sectors. The guidance clarifies how business can operationalize risk-based due diligence into management systems and global supply chains. So now moving on to the role of the National Contact Point, or the NCP for short, and what it is that we do in the unit here. So the Ireland NCP is located in the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. It's a standalone unit. And under the guidelines, governments are requested to set up this NCP. We have 2 main functions. That's to promote and advocate the guidelines and related due diligence guidance, so awareness of them is raised, and to handle complaints of alleged non-observance by a multinational enterprise, referred to as specific instances. On the promotional aspect, there are a number of avenues that we continue to pursue to try and raise awareness of the Ireland NCP and the guidelines. Information sessions such as this one are an important communication tool. Over the last 3 years, we've hosted a number of information sessions, participated at trade union events, and started to organise these webinars. We also continue to use and avail of the social media to raise awareness using the department's LinkedIn and Twitter or X accounts. Now, onto the specific instances, or basically complaints, which is a unique built-in grievance mechanism under the system. This is where the NCP can contribute to the resolution of issues that arise in relation to the implementation of the guidelines. We may offer what's known as our good offices to help the parties involved resolve the issues by providing them a platform for discussion, typically through mediation. Complaints received under the NCP process are not legal cases, and NCPs are not judicial bodies. Our focus is on problem solving using non-adversarial dialogue, typically through mediation, to help parties find mutually agreed solutions. As you can see there on the slide, over 650 specific instances have been handled by the 51 NCPs around the world. So the complaint procedure has 4 steps, or 4 stages, and the first stage is the initial assessment. And during this initial phase, the NCP receives a complaint from a party. We inform the multinational enterprise about the substance of the issues raised and request a response. Based on the information, the NCP will then make a decision on whether the issues raised merit a more detailed examination. We will publish a statement if we do or do not accept a complaint. In the cases where we do accept a complaint, we move then to the second stage, which is the good offices. And the good offices are offered to help assist resolve the issues and conduct consultations with the party through consensual or non-adversarial dialogue. So both parties concerned need to agree to this offer, and the party's commitment to participate in good faith is a crucial element in this. It typically involves mediation to provide a pathway forward, and we typically use an external professional mediator for that. So once the mediation is concluded, the parties may reach an agreement on the issues raised, and then the procedure is closed and the NCP can prepare a final statement in coordination with the parties involved. If it's a case that the parties do not agree in a resolution or that parties are unwilling to participate, the NCP will conduct a fact-finding examination and also issue a statement on the matter. Regardless, the NCP will try to include recommendations if there's agreement or no agreement, and then we'll follow up with the parties, which is the 4th stage in the process. So we'll follow up with the parties to determine if the recommendations agreement have been followed in accordance with the final statement or report, and we may issue a statement on these matters. Just to finally say then as well that some of you may be aware that we had our peer review back in October 2021. And this was to assess how we function and operate. It identified what we do well and what we could improve upon through recommendations. So the Ireland NCP had received 8 recommendations relating to the structure, institutional arrangements of the NCP, how we promote ourselves and the guidelines, and how we handle complaints. We have made progress on a number of these recommendations, and there is more work to be done there, and we will be working with some of the stakeholders. For example, we do want to set up an advisory body, so we will be in touch with relevant stakeholders shortly on that. You can find more information about the NCP and the guidelines at enterprise.gov/OECD NCP, or you can also contact us directly at OECD NCP at enterprise.gov.ie. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague, Orla O'Brien, who will take you through the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm just going to share my slides now. Hopefully that will be successful. I'm going to provide today a short update on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Many of you will be familiar with the directive, but for those of you who aren't, I'll start with just a short outline of the directive once again, and then provide an update on current developments on its implementation in Ireland. So as you're aware, the directive itself arises from the European Green Deal and then the commitment in the EU Action Plan for Financing Sustainable Growth. And it really is about orienting capital flows towards more sustainable investment and generating the type of information flow that will make that possible. So following 2 years of negotiations, in the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive was agreed by the member states of the European Union and entered into force in January 2023. So the key information, the directive will require annual reporting by companies on sustainability matters. That sustainability matters are defined as environmental, social and governance, including human rights matters. The reporting will be underpinned by European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRS, that were adopted by the Commission in July 2023 and published officially in December 2023. Directors of companies will be responsible for ensuring that the sustainability information is prepared in accordance with these standards, and the information itself should be clearly identifiable within the director's report. The management report is the kind of EU term, director's report is the company law term, in a dedicated section. Reporting is on a double materiality basis. The best way I have of describing this concept, which is quite new, is impact materiality. That's looking at the impact of a company's operations on environmental, social and governance matters. And then financial materiality, which is looking in the impacts of those matters on the company's operations and performance. There will be assurance of the information provided by appropriately qualified sustainability assurance auditors, and the assurance initially is on a limited basis, progressing to reasonable over time. The scope of the sustainability reporting, I suppose, of key interest, it will encompass all large undertakings or companies and large public interest entities ultimately, though I'll talk a little bit about the phasing in the next slide. It will also encompass SMEs who are listed on an EU stock market, excluding micros. Then ultimately subsidiaries and branches that are large of non-EU companies with a significant presence in the EU must also submit an equivalent sustainability report in due course. The EU estimates in total 55,000 companies in the EU compared to 11,000 in scope of the current rules will be impacted by the new rules. In Ireland, it is in the order of 2,000 or 3,000, we estimate. Transposition and other deadlines. This is probably of key interest today, and I'm going to update you certainly on the transposition but member states had a very short period of time in EU terms to transpose the new rules, just 18 months. Typically, it's 2 years. So by 6 July 2024, we must have our Ireland legislation in place implementing the directive. For the actual entities who are in scope, the largest public interest entities with greater than 500 employees, effectively those public interest entities already reporting under existing non-financial reporting rules are in scope for financial years commencing on or after 1 January 2024. So their reports will issue in 2025. The next year is probably the biggest increase will be all large companies and large pies, and they will have to begin reporting for financial years after 1 January 2025, so reports issuing in 2026. Listed SMEs have until financial years commencing 1 January 2026, but they also can opt out from reporting until 1 January 2028. And finally, the large subsidiaries and branches of third country undertakings will come into scope for financial years after 1 January 2028. We have some advice for stakeholders starting on the journey with CSRD. This is also on our dedicated webpage. Really assess whether you're in scope of the directive, either directly or as part of the value chain. Determine your company's existing position on sustainability matters, assessing and analysing reporting processes, internal controls and governance. Discuss the directive and the standards with your auditor, accountant or business advisor. And if you think you might be captured by the value chain of a large company you work with, start the conversation with them to find out what this means and what information you must be asked to supply. Evaluate your ability to capture the data as a company in scope or as a business within the value chain. And consider also the suite of government supports available to assist companies in the green transition, which are highly relevant really to kind of improving performance under the CSRD. All this information, as I said, is on the department's website under the Responsible Business banner. And I think that just brings me now to maybe the updates and the next steps. I think our two priorities are communication and the legislation. On communication, many of you will already have subscribed to our dedicated mailbox, csrd@enterprise. .gov.ie and we try and answer your questions there as they arise. So that's one of our key methods of communicating with stakeholders. So I'd encourage you to sign up. Just by way of maybe the most recent updates, as you're aware, the Commission have now adopted and published the ESRS standards. So as part of the implementation of those standards, EFRAG, which is the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, has now got a dedicated portal where you can submit your questions on the standards to EFRAG, and you can also see frequently asked questions published. So that might be of interest to companies who are starting to look at the standards and see if actually any of your questions have been answered, or submit a question to EFRAG. Another recent development has been the publication of exposure drafts of the standards, proposed standards for the listed SMEs, and also a voluntary standard for SMEs that are in the value chain. Now, these are exposure drafts, so there's a good deal of discussion. There'll be a webinar on the 16th of February held by EFRAG. So I'd encourage people to go to EFRAG's website, and indeed you'll see the contact details on our own webpage, and have a look and sign up if you're interested in the discussion and influencing the exposure drafts. The vision for the voluntary SME standard is that it would satisfy, if you like, any of the asks if a company is in the value chain of a larger company. So that there's some really useful resources there. A second element, I suppose, of importance really is that what we're getting a lot of questions around scope. I suppose that's of interest, and around consolidation. So we're hoping to get some more clarity, maybe even from the Commission, and publish, see if we can get a sort of a question that answers a Q&A document ourselves that answers some of those frequently asked questions about scope and consolidation. And then by way of update on the legislation, well, we're actively working on that with the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel. I know, and it has been our objective to move as quickly as we can on the legislation. So I can't unfortunately give you kind of a time frame other than it will be before the 6th of July, and we're trying to complete the legislation as soon as possible. In policy terms, there will be no surprises. We've published the policy paper, and you can also see the directive, but I do appreciate, and we do appreciate in the department, that that people like to see the legislation and as soon as possible. So that's our objective. And I think that really brings me to the end of the presentation. So once again, thank you for listening, and do consider signing up to our mailing list if you haven't already. Thank you. I'll hand over now, I think, to my colleague Aisling to talk to you about eco-design.
Thanks, Orla. And it's great to speak to you this morning. Let me just share my screen there. Okay. And I need to put it on screen share. Great. Okay, I'm going to talk to you this morning about the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. So this is an EU initiative that was proposed back in 2022, and it aims to bring circular design into all of the products that we use, and to thereby reduce their environmental, their life cycle environmental impacts. So I'll start off by showing you this. It's a Commission infographic I've borrowed here to show you where eco-design for sustainable products sits within the Commission's overall circular economy package. So it's all aimed towards making sustainable products the norm. So you can see kind of like a toolkit here in the middle, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. And that's going to be complemented by product-specific EU rules that are kind of happening in terms of construction products, and also this packaging directive, chemicals legislation, and a batteries regulation, which was recently agreed as well. At the top here, we have the existing eco-design and energy labelling working plan. So the new regulation is going to repeal and replace the existing eco-design, which those of you who work in that area might be familiar with. It applies to energy using products. We also have, it's going to be a key part in delivering the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. You'll also be maybe familiar with some of the other pieces of legislation going through Europe as regards consumer rights and empowering consumers for a green transition and protection against greenwashing. There's a green claims directive. There's a right to repair directive going through at the moment as well. And then at the very bottom here of this infographic, you'll see kind of the key features of the ESPR proposal. So it's going to set performance requirements, information requirements for products. It's going to introduce a digital product passport, which I'll tell you more about later in the presentation. It's going to track substances of concern in the products that we use. It's going to introduce labeling requirements. There's going to be some mandatory criteria for public procurement. And crucially, it's going to stop the destruction of unsold consumer goods. So here's the main features of ESPR. As I said already, it replaces the 2009 Eco-Design Directive, which has been operating really successfully. It covers 32 product groups currently, so some household appliances, some boilers, lighting equipment, computers, monitors, all that kind of stuff, and it mainly applies to their energy use. The new ESPR is going to apply to almost all products and a much wider range of criteria than just energy. Crucially, unlike Orla was telling you there about CSRD, which is a directive and will need to be transposed, ESPR is a framework regulation. So it is directly applicable, but we will have to put in place national arrangements to give it further effect. As I said, it will introduce a digital product passport, and it will introduce transparency and aim to prevent the destruction of unsold goods. And then it will have mandatory green public procurement criteria. So just a quick word about the scope. I said it would apply to almost all products. So these are some of the exclusions: food and feed, medicinal and veterinary products, living plants, animals, microorganisms, products of human origin, and vehicles. But pretty much everything else is potentially within scope. So again, this is a Commission infographic here. It's just to show some of the kind of product aspects that will be included. So ESPR is going to be a framework regulation, and it gives further powers to make delegated acts for specific product groups or for kind of more horizontal aspects. So the regulation sets out the types of eco-design requirements that might be in these delegated acts. So you see a list of them here on the right-hand side. I won't go through all of them, but they're kind of durability, reliability, repairability, resource use, recycled content, environmental impacts on water, various other types of environmental impacts. So not all of these criteria will apply to all of the delegated acts. It will depend on the particular product group that will be covered under that delegated act, and certain kind of characteristics and certain of these criteria will be more relevant to particular products. A bit more about the digital product passport. It's covered under Chapter 3 of the draft regulation, and then again details are going to be set out in the delegated act. It will provide information about the product's environmental sustainability, and it will be accessible by scanning a data carrier on the product. It will include information on the durability, repairability, recycled content, and all those other criteria that I mentioned. It will allow consumers and businesses to make informed choices when purchasing products, but it will also facilitate repairs and recycling and improve transparency about the product's life cycle impacts on the environment. And it will also help public authorities to better perform checks and controls. I've included a link here to the SURPASS project, which has been underway at European level, and that's piloting the deployment of DPPs. And I've included a link there. They're holding a webinar about the state of play of those pilots and kind of future developments on the DPP. So that's going to be run by SURPASS on Tuesday, the 5th of March. So I'd urge anyone with an interest to dial up to that. It could be very useful. So now in terms of updates and timelines, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some of the priority products so you can kind of spot how it might affect your business. Political agreement was reached in late last year. We're still awaiting publication in the official journal, but we expect the final text of the regulation, once it has gone through kind of the translations and the kind of tidying up that's happening at the moment, we expect that to be adopted and published in the official journal soon. Hopefully Q1, but I don't know, haven't heard that yet. We're working to put in place market surveillance arrangements in Ireland. So even though it's a regulation and will be directly applicable, we'll have to set up arrangements for market surveillance. So we're working with all of the relevant market surveillance authorities to make and government colleagues to make that happen. And we'll continue kind of our communications around that process. And we expect that the Commission work plan, which is really where we'll see kind of the regulations start to kick in and take effect, we expect that work plan at the end of this year, so 9 months after entry into force. And I've just, by way of final slide here, just included a quick extract. I'm not sure if you can read all of this, but this the regulation is very prescriptive about the kind of products that the Commission will need to consider in its first work plan. So it shall prioritise the following product groups: iron, steel, aluminium, textiles, notably garments and footwear, furniture, including mattresses, tyres, detergents, paints, lubricants, chemicals, energy-related products, ICT products, and other electronics. So as you can see, very, very wide range of products that are going to be included. And then the Commission will set up working groups at European level, which will be made up of European experts, and there'll be opportunity for business representative groups to become involved as well. So if there's a kind of a key product here that is in your sector, you might be able to get onto your European Trade Association and you can become involved later this year when we see the Commission's work plan. in developing these measures, because that's one of the kind of key features of the existing eco-design regime that the Commission were keen to keep, is these are all co-created with industry experts throughout, from the impact assessment stage all the way through. So they're very keen to maintain that. So really watch this space, and feel free to contact me. There's my personal email address, and also our eco-design mailbox. We can pick up and answer any queries that come into that. So I think I'll hand back to Owen now, if I stop sharing and take some Q&A. Thanks.
Excellent, and thank you to Aisling, Orla and Paul for three really excellent presentations. Hopefully you found them very informative. I suppose this is part of just really to get these explanations out to you so that you understand the overall priorities of it and the detail within it. So we have time now for a Q&A, and I would just ask anyone, if you're putting in a chat, just to put your, if you're representing an organization, it's very useful for us to know where the questions are coming from. So I know we already had, actually, I'm going to go to each presenter. We have enough for each presenter, at least one each to start off, and then we can go. The first one is actually, I can answer this, where it says the question came in on where can I find out more about the OECD National Contact Point and that. I'd like to just direct you all to the Responsible Business webpage of our department. If you just go onto the Department of Enterprise web page, and you can search, put in Responsible Business, it'll bring you to our homepage, which has links to each and all of the initiatives and directives contained within, and can be a good basis for you to find information and to kind of, I suppose, hope to direct you to each of the individual areas. So I would just answer that. But we have another question, which I'm just going to ask Paul here, and if I can get it. Oh, unfortunately, wasn't the name of this one, but how do the guidelines fit into a changing environment where there are so many increasing number of mandatory initiatives? So with the NCP being and the OECD guidelines being voluntary, how does that fit in to these mandatory initiatives? So over to you, Paul, please.
Thanks very much, Owen. It's a really good question. I suppose, yeah, and we've seen, you know, the calls from civil society, multiple stakeholders have been listened to. We're seeing this transition going from a voluntary to a mandatory basis. But that's not to say that the voluntary kind of initiatives, such as the NCP and the guidelines, that will still play a really important role here. The way I see it is in that the guidelines and ILO standards are the guiding principles from the UN. While they are voluntary, they set a really good basis. So in a way, I would say that they set nearly like a foundation of a building, and then you're building on that foundation. So you'll see, like on all the sides, CSRD, it references the guidelines. There's a disclosure chapter, for example. So it's building on these standards. And I think that's a really important part of all of this, to ensure that all these various initiatives are aligned. We will still play a very important role. There's a unique grievance mechanism built in to the NCP process. And I still think there's a lot of merit in people considering that going down the line.
Excellent. That's quite a thorough response. So thank you for that, Paul. I'll head over to Orla now, where there is a number of questions there, but one is just if there's any more detail on the legislation, anything on timelines, if there was anything that you could just mention there, maybe you'd like to clarify on that. Thanks, Orla.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. So as I said, we're working on the draft legislation, and it's regulations under the European Communities 1972 Act, and the objective is to try to get it completed and published as soon as possible. What I'm really finding useful is as people are asking questions, that helps us in terms of the drafting and knowing, you know, exactly what people are going to be looking at when they look at the draft legislation. So maybe, as I said, like my fervent hope is to have the legislation done, you know, a good a good period of time before the 6th of July, but unfortunately I can't make a sort of a date, a commitment date, but we're working away. I might just touch on a few of the questions in the chat, if that's okay, Owen. Some of the ones that are, again, there's some questions about scope and about whether companies, if you like, whether companies that are not incorporated in Europe are going to be impacted before, I think, before 2028. So the answer is that the rules only apply to companies incorporated in the EU, even the subsidiaries and branches. So I hope that I hope that's clear for people. It's not. It's insofar as it impacts out with the EU. It's about the subsidiaries and branches of the large subsidiaries and branches in the EU. So I hope that helps clarify that, but please email again if you need further clarification. There's another question about the assurance providers and appropriate qualifications, and about IASPs. So we're working on drafting the public consultation on for the option for independent assurance service providers currently, and we hope to get that out in this quarter. But that's in fact the intention more than a hope. And otherwise, assurance providers, that what's provided for in the directive is that statutory auditors can become qualified, subject to initially continuing education as a kind of transitional provision, but subsequently then subject to particular educational qualifications, etc. I don't want to take up too much time in case there's some other questions by other people, so I'll leave it there, even though I see more questions, and if I haven't answered them, and I know I haven't, do send them to our mailbox, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Orla. There is a stream of them coming in there, so we will do our best to answer them here, and there's a number under consideration. As Orla said, there's a contact for her there at the end of her presentation. So I'll just move on to Aisling there. So there's a couple of questions, but the first one is just, there was a mention of the digital product passport. Do you have any timelines on that? So maybe that's the first one.
Yeah, work has started already. I mentioned the Surpass project, so I'd urge anyone to have a look at that. They're looking at them coming in maybe about 2027. So in the meantime, there's the 3 pilot projects going on within the Surpass project. So they're piloting the DPP in electronics, batteries, and textiles. So anyone interested in those 3 areas, or those 3 value chains, can have a look at that. There's the crucial thing really about the DPP is that it's going to be decentralized. So it's going to be kind of the Commission having very basic information held centrally, and then the rest will be delegated out to the businesses in the supply chains that will kind of alleviate concerns about kind of maybe sharing of confidential information. So the businesses will be in control of their own aspect of the information. And obviously there'll be tiered levels of information available throughout the supply chain. So hopefully the kind of national authorities will have the most information to enable them to enforce it efficiently, and businesses to businesses within the supply chain won't have any of the confidential information, and then consumers will have the information that they need, rather than getting bombarded with too much information that will confuse them even more. So that's going to be a key part of those pilot projects and the rollout of the DPP as well. But 2027 is when we expect to see them.
Right, now there's a tough one here for you, actually, that you may or may not be able to answer here, but it's actually quite a good question. So it relates to any unsold goods. Do you know what would happen to them, and a concern that they could be sent outside of the EU? So you may not have all the answers, but do you have any for that?
I've read the question there from Duncan. Thanks. Yeah, this is one of the key aspects, and it was kind of one of the most controversial aspects in a way in the actual framework regulation itself. Obviously, it's something everyone knows is a problem. We all want to address it, and we want to address it in the right way. The regulation has a number of controls built in to prevent that. So initially, it kind of introduces a principle to not destroy unsold goods. Then next kind of level then is everyone who does destroy unsold goods is going to have to report on it. And there's all kind of, again, kind of controls built into that. Has to be prominently displayed on their website. They can't kind of hide it somewhere, or, you know, that's all built in. And then there's actually a specific ban in the final text. I think it was intended that most of this would come out in delegated acts down the line, but I think a lot of member states felt so strongly that textiles in particular were a problem in this area that the ban on destruction of textiles is built into the actual draft regulation. So yeah, I think we're confident that what's there will work really well, and then the Commission will be empowered to introduce more delegated acts down the line to change that if it's not working, to introduce more regulation and to introduce more product groups into the specific ban as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Thanks.
That's a tough one, and thank you for such a comprehensive response there. I might just, there's another couple of questions coming in about the OECD NCP, Paul. Just, you might answer how it has any relevance for smaller businesses. And like, obviously it was designed in its initial and its repeated variations as a guidelines for large companies who have the capacity. But maybe Paul might just want to give just a nod to what it might have for SMEs.
Yeah. So the guidelines, you know, in the title itself has multinational enterprises. So it is aimed at the big companies. However, that doesn't mean that smaller businesses don't have to follow the recommendations. They're voluntary recommendations. So I think where businesses can, they should be following those recommendations. You know, I think one of the important things, and we're seeing more and more with the various directives and regulations coming out, is this thing called due diligence. So I think that's a very important step for businesses. And, you know, as I said, the OECD did produce that really good guidance document in 2018. So I think that's possibly a very good basis for smaller companies, SMEs, if they wanted to start thinking about their due diligence obligations and what they might want to do, then I would advise maybe looking at that document as a starting point.
Excellent. And there's one more, just it's a fairly one that there's something you mentioned in it on the EFRAG webinar. You said, I think you believe you said it was the 16th. Is that correct? Just so I can confirm it for the audience.
Yes, Owen, and I might just answer one other question, because this is there's a question about not-for-profits, maybe possibly even a couple of questions. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive amends the EU Accounting Directive, and if you look at Recital 5 of the EU Accounting Directive, not-for-profit is not in scope of the EU Accounting Directive. But it would be open to anybody to voluntarily apply CSRD, obviously, and its reporting requirements. There's another question about scope and whether it's going to follow. I think I understand the question, but can I just say, in the first year of implementation of CSRD, it's just the very large public interest entities that are included. I think that answers that question. We're sort of parking the scope of the existing non-financial reporting rules and just focus on the way that the CSRD introduces the new rules. So yeah, so I'll stop there, because I could go on and on, but I won't.
Yes, a hot topic anyway. I think that's, Ashton, did you want to come in there for a second?
Sorry, yeah, no, I just see another question in there from Paul in Mannock and on the eco-design. Paul, it actually, I think what you will see is that it will come in the construction products regulation is where it will really impact you. So ESPR is designed to apply to products that don't already have their own field, if you know what I mean. So where it's going to be mirroring the construction products and ESPR are going to be similar, but this construction products regulation is where you'll see the impact on your sector in cement and building products.
Well, thank you. We have quite a number of questions there. I think we've answered most of them in the general. And I would just again say that we will have the video, and we'll try to put up the presentations on that responsible business page on our departmental website, so that they have the links if you do have specific questions to our colleagues here, and Orla, Aisling and Paul. So just as a wrap up, I really think that for us as policymakers and as officials, it's very, very useful for us to engage with you, to hear those questions, to see where the pinch points are and where we need to put our focus on. As I said, we have our Responsible Business Forum, which is actually next week. We'll see a number of stakeholders at that. I'd encourage anyone who's part of a representative group or is part of a representative group and hasn't heard about it, many of them are represented at the forum. So just to, if you want your voice heard at that, it's very important. But again, we will be having a number of these webinars over the year. They will vary in what really are the topical elements of our responsible business initiatives. We have the ban on products made with forced labour. There's the right to repair and others. And the CSDDD hopefully will be the stage where we can talk about it in more concrete terms at that stage. So I just wanted to very much say thank you to our three presenters, also to Declan and Abigail who have helped us. From personal note, I just want to say, like on the OECD guidelines, these are used as a kind of vital foundation for the theory and policy history of a lot of these agenda items. While the OECD obviously covers countries that are outside of the EU, it is being kind of the standard and the kind of basis that a lot of the ideas have been taken with, and the history in there, as Paul has mentioned, and has really helped us. In relation to CSRD, I just think it's importance of know your supply chain. I mean, that's really the key part of how it impacts you and where it is. And Orla's mentioned a number of initiatives and European initiatives to investigate that for you. On the eco-design, I just think it's showing that part of the making sustainable products the norm is now the way for businesses who are involved in that and really want to take advantage of that to gain their market edge, and to see that if there is some level of slowness in that, the ones that are taking advantage of that are going to maybe corner up the market, you know. So it's worthwhile our Irish businesses being front and centre of that. And we'll be there to help everyone as we can on our way. And I think, you know, we have, I'm probably speaking to the converted here on this call, so we have a lot of businesses who are, you know, really listening and really trying to get to grips with very complex issues, and we do acknowledge their complexity. But avoidance of these issues and these initiatives will leave a business behind. It's quite simple. And it's inimical to a better society in Ireland. We want these initiatives, our society has asked for them, and we as policymakers have to respond. And you as businesses can take advantage of it, as much work as that is. So again, I'd just like to thank everyone who's been involved, thank all of you as our audience for participating. As I said, if you just go onto our department website and type in responsible business, it'll bring it to it. And I'll just say, as a final, our Minister Cleary is very keen on this agenda. He is pushing all of us to bring it forward and to really engage with you as stakeholders. So thank you all, and thank you very much.